Welcome again to Profiles, a production of Channel 18, Nantucket Community Television. I'm Charley Walters. I'm pleased to have with me today Nanci Walker, who a lot of you in Nantucket will know as someone who's worked in the music business on Nantucket in numerous ways for a number of years. But most of her career has been in Los Angeles in a different part of the music business, and that's most of what we're going to be talking about today, because Nanci is about to leave Nantucket and go back to Los Angeles. Thank you for coming in. I'm glad to catch you before you go.
Thank you so much. You're
In fact,
catching me.
by the time people watch this, you will already have gone, I believe.
Yep, I'm leaving 6 a.m. I think there's a 6:30 a.m. boat.
Yes, there is.
George, the black Labrador Retriever, who came from West Hollywood, he's getting in the car with me. We're going to New York. We're flying back. Wow.
The dog and the plane.
Yeah.
How do you get started in the music business, in your end of the music business? Maybe you better tell us what your end of the music business has been in Los Angeles.
So I spent 30 years doing the same thing. A lot of people move into different positions, but I actually pretty much jumped into the job that I wanted. It's called A&R.
And tell us what that is.
That's artist and repertoire. So my job is to scour the world for what I think is the greatest new talent, usually in rock or alternative rock or rap, some sort of contemporary music, assign the band to the record label, and then I oversee. Repertoire means putting together the agent, the manager, the lawyer. Once the artist is signed, I'm hiring the producer, the mixer, the arranger, putting them together with songwriters, maybe giving them songs to sing because they don't have hit songs. Then the record's made, and then I go to our video department to make a video. We go to the art department to make the artwork for the album. I oversee the whole project from beginning to end. I sit in on the marketing meetings. While they're talking about Mariah Carey, I'm like, no, forget Mariah Carey. You have to pay attention to my artists, which is usually a new rock band that the promotion guys don't want to pay attention to. You would know that. You, as a record store person, you always had new artists that you thought, now how am I going to sell this record?
But no, I was trying to sell things. I used to own a record store, for those of you who don't know that. When I was doing my job, it was a result of you and all the other record company people having done their jobs beforehand.
That's right. There's a radio guy on KCRW, or he was on KCRW, and he was always saying how he discovered Pete Yorn, or he discovered the Killers. And I would think to myself, well, actually I had to see them before they had a record, made the record, and then you got it after we did all of that work. So really no radio person discovers an artist. Now they may actually give it a push when no other radio station would, which would mean they helped break them.
But that's not the same thing that you were doing, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, how many A&R people might there be at a big record company?
When I started in the music business in 1983, there were probably 3 or 4 A&R women, just FYI, in the music business in the world. I mean, that job was not a job for women.
And how many men would there have been at that point?
I'm trying to think. So I'm going to take Columbia, which is the biggest label that I've ever worked for, part of Sony. I think the A&R department had 8 A&R people on both coasts. Actually, if you added Nashville, maybe 12 A&R people.
Okay, well, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
Now, as an A&R person, are you going to clubs all the time? Are you listening to demo tapes all the time?
Yeah.
So what was your workday like? I mean, when did your workday start?
So I started out in New York, and in New York, the clubs close at like 4 and 5 in the morning. So sometimes I would be going to see a band at 1 in the morning. So I'd literally be watching The Tonight Show at home and think, all right, I can just see The Tonight Show. Now I got to run out and see a band and come back and I could see the end of The Tonight Show. Or then I would go and take a nap and go out at 1:30 in the morning and go see a band. And so I would start my mornings usually start about 8 in the morning. In LA, they start at 6 in the morning because I would go to a trainer first.
And you've got the time difference, I suppose, coming into it too when you were in LA.
Yeah, so you want to talk to people on the East Coast. You want to. It's hard. It's such a hard life that I thought it was important to stay fit. So the trainer figured at 6 in the morning. Then I would go deal with East Coast calls, meetings all the time. We have a meeting about a meeting, for God's sake, in the major corporations. And then at night, there's usually a dinner with a manager or an agent or a lawyer. Everybody wants to spend time with you. And then later after that, you're going to maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 clubs to see artists perform. And they're expecting you. So if you don't show up, you're just breaking someone's heart, or the manager, had told the band, oh, Columbia's going to come in. And then if you don't show up, that's kind of disappointing for everyone. So you really feel like you have to.
When did you sleep?
I don't sleep even to this day very much, to tell you the truth. I probably go to sleep at like 2 in the morning, and I usually wake up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. I just don't sleep a lot.
Do you take a nap?
I do. I'm a napper. I am a napper. That surprises people who know me. Yeah, I usually sleep at about 4 in the afternoon, 4 to 6 maybe. Yeah, I like to take a nap.
Now, how did you get into the music business? Did you want to be in the music business? Did you just want to be with a big corporation?
I wanted to be in the music business. Okay, I'm going to go back to when my parents were running a hotel in New Hampshire. And we had a jukebox. And our bar seated probably 200 people. And this man would come like every 3 months or something, and he'd want to replace the records in the jukebox. And my dad would say, oh, why don't I get my daughter? She'll tell you what to put in there. So in a way, I was doing A&R when I was 10 years old, because I was sitting with the promotion guy who had all these singles, and I would say, well, people didn't really like that. They don't dance to that. We need this. Oh, we got to keep this, because every time we play, I'm trying to think of a song way back in the 70s that people would jump up, and it was probably I can't remember, but I would make sure that the ones that people reacted to stayed in the jukebox. So I began there, and I started telling my family very, very young that I wanted to be the person who chose the music that came on the radio.
My dad wanted to be a musician.
I never wanted to be, well, I had no talent as a musician. I took piano lessons, I took guitar lessons, I wanted to sing. I think I was told pretty early on that that was probably not a good idea. I have no musical talent whatsoever. I'm a fan of music.
But you have an ear.
I have an ear for music, and something that I do that I have been told by people in the record business, Nanci, nobody listens to lyrics. But I, even as a young adult, would pore over the albums the minute I got them, and I would read the lyrics. And they would speak to me. And I would feel like, oh, that artist is talking about something that I understand. And I'd create a connection with the artist right there and then, way before I'd even heard the song. So I'm a lyric person. I'm a songwriter person. And, as soon as I got out of high school, I wanted to do this. And then my parents said, look, if you take any time off between high school and college, we're not going to pay for college. But when I got to college, I started booking, oh gosh, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I was in Nantucket.
You weren't born here, but you spent part of your childhood here.
I was, I think, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to, I went to boarding school in New Hampshire, and I went to Boston College. But I think I was probably 16 or maybe 17, somehow I managed to see NRBQ on Nantucket. Do you remember NRBQ?
Oh, yes.
New Rhythm and Blues
I never
Quintet.
saw them, but yes, their records were fabulous.
Maybe I hadn't seen them. I was in high school. I remember I had their record. I was a huge fan. And when they came to Nantucket for the summer, I went out to I can't remember which club, but they had
I think it was the Chicken Box.
It was either the Chicken Box or it was 30 Acres.
Might have been.
Did 30 Acres have a band house connected to it?
Probably, but I don't
Okay.
know.
So I went there, knocked on the door, and said, I'd like to be your housekeeper. Because I couldn't get into the bar, but I wanted to know them. And I remember I met Al Anderson, and he was like, you want to be our housekeeper? I'm like, yeah. I just want to bring you food and drink, and I'm going to make your beds, and I'm going to bring nice sheets in. And they were like, sure, you can be our housekeeper. So every time NRBQ came to town, I would take my parents' sheets from we owned the Westmore Inn. And I would take all the beautiful things from Westmore and put them in the band house for NRBQ.
Did your parents know that?
They did. And also, NRBQ would then allow me into the club. They'd say, oh, we need, Nanci, our housekeeper needs to bring us water. So that way I had an excuse to go in and serve them water. I'd get in and see them perform.
Well, that's very clever.
Yeah.
Now, you're out of college. Let's jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
You're out of college. How do you end up doing what you did?
Well, so I'm going to tell you that while I was in college, I started my own booking agency. And I booked my sister's high school graduation band in Nantucket. I probably booked 4 shows in my entire life. I brought the band that ended up being Treat Her Right, and they ended up being Morphine. I brought some interesting artists to Nantucket. Then I graduated from college. I left Nantucket. I went to New York City to the New Music Seminar. And this was in the middle of punk rock. And I was wearing what I thought would be a job-getting outfit. I was wearing like a Chanel-style suit, and I was holding a leather briefcase. I had pearls on.
And you're surrounded by people with green hair. And
I was, yeah. And I remember going up the escalator to the Hilton Hotel thinking, you know, these are fascinating looking people, you know, and here I was to get my job in the music business. And I went to the booking agents forum, and there was a man sitting next to me that kept screaming out. I thought he was so rude. All the booking agents were talking, and when he didn't agree with what they'd say, he'd say, well, actually, the truth is, and I was just writing everything down. And he turned to me and he said, who are you? Because I definitely didn't fit in. I had the pearls, the suit, I was writing everything down. Everybody else was very casual, so to speak, in punk rock. And I said, well, I'm a young booking agent from Boston. And he said, I'm a booking agent. And he said, who do you work for? And I said, I have my own company, you know. And so he said, well, I'm going to go to the Carnegie Deli with all these other booking agents. Why don't you come with me? And meet me after this, and we'll tell you all about being a booking agent. So I went. His name was Bill Graham. I didn't know.
And tell us who Bill Graham was.
Well, Bill Graham was probably one of the most important promoters in the music industry. I think he also managed the Rolling Stones, didn't he? Or did he just book the Rolling Stones?
I don't know that he managed them, but he was probably best known for Fillmore East and Fillmore West.
Yeah.
Which were the places to play in the late 60s and into the 70s.
So Charlie, I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about Bill Graham. I really didn't know anything about the business. I was a music fan, and I wanted to work with artists. So when he asked me to lunch, it really didn't mean anything to me. And I went to have lunch with him and about 10 other booking agents, and he said, well, this girl's so nice, you guys tell her why she's too nice a girl to be in the music business. And I said one of the stupidest things I've ever said. I said, sir, the day I meet Mick Jagger, one-on-one, as a peer, 2 people in the music industry, until that day, I will not be getting out of the record business because I was such a fan of the Rolling Stones.
And here you are all these years later, and you're still in it.
I'm still in it. I wanted to tell.
But keep going. I interrupted.
Right. So what happened is I was living in a women's residence. I was trying to get a job doing anything while I was looking for work in the music business. I get a phone call. Bill Graham had someone call me, and they said, Bill wants to invite you to a Talking Heads show.
And this is back when Talking Heads were,
just,
barely known.
Well, they were pretty well known. They were playing, I can't remember. It was a huge place in New Jersey. It was the first time I went to backstage to a large show. This was probably 1983 or 1980.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's further on that.
So I go to the Talking Heads show with this other agent. Bill Graham had invited us. We go backstage, and Bill Graham walks Mick Jagger up to me. And he said, Mick, this is Nanci Walker. She's a young booking agent from Boston. Mick Jagger, Nanci Walker, Mick Jagger, and then he said, now you can get out of the music business. And I was just like, I was so starstruck, I just went and stared at a wall. And I bring that up because I am still in the record business, and as I moved from New York to LA to work for EMI Music Publishing, and then on to work for it was at EMI Music Publishing when he died in a helicopter crash. And
Bill Graham.
I had always wanted to tell him, you're not going to believe it, but I somehow made it, you know, because it's a very, very, very hard business to get into, especially for a woman, for a young woman.
So you went from booking to publishing?
No, I went from booking, meeting
Bill
Graham, to getting my first job. The guy who brought me to the Talking Heads concert on behalf of Bill Graham, he said, I know a guy who's looking for a secretary. Why don't you apply for that job? And so in a way, Bill Graham helped me get my first job in the music business. So I worked for a manager named Mike Lembo, and I was a day-to-day manager for The Church and Jules Shear, who's a songwriter.
The Church was a band, by the way, for those who may not know that.
The Church is a band from Australia. And Jules Shear, we signed to a publishing deal, and he said, why don't you start a publishing company? So I didn't know what a publishing company was, and he was your typical music industry guy with the ponytail, and he said, if you ask me 3 questions, you're fired. I don't have time to tell you what a publishing company is. You start it, and just run it. So I did. I went down to NYU, and I met with Bill Krasilovsky. He had written a book called This Business of Music, and I said, what do I need? He gave me some contracts, and I started signing bands and songwriters to music publishing deals. And then I would go to Europe with their records, and I would try and get them signed to license the records. Did I know what I was doing? No. Did I know what a licensing deal was? No. I showed up in France and took meetings and held up albums and said, NRBQ actually, we signed NRBQ. I would hold up the NRBQ record and say, I'd like to license this for your territory. And then I'd just sit quietly and see what happened, and people would say, yes, we'd like that.
Let me stop you there. Explain to everybody why music publishing is so important in the music business.
Okay. The intellectual property is the song. So the record...
Not the recording of the song, the song.
Correct. So when you sign, there's 2 rights. There's the publishing rights and there's the record company rights. The publisher actually shares, I want to say owns, because they usually sign a portion of the song for the life of the copyright. The publisher is taking care of the song. The record company has a mechanical right, which is the recording of the song that they paid for. So many years ago, obviously, when CDs were flying and records, albums were flying off the shelves, it would behoove you to have a record deal, because they were selling really the artwork and the plastic, okay, and the recording they paid for. But the song, those rights belong to the publishing company. It gets complicated.
Well, if you buy a CD from someone, that artist is theoretically getting a royalty because you bought his or her CD.
Yes.
But the songwriter is also getting his or her own separate royalty for having written the song.
Correct.
And publishing gets into
and for
what
many
I said
years,
before, the song
for
as
many
opposed
years,
to the recording of the song.
Although I think it just changed this year. For many years, when the song was played on the radio,
yes, there was another
that's a
fee
performance right.
Yeah.
But the record companies were being paid, and the publishers oftentimes, or maybe it's, don't even get me complicated. It's a complicated business.
It is.
I've worked on both ends of it.
There are 1,000 ways of making money and 1,000 ways of getting screwed by somebody who wants to get your money.
Well, and the record industry was never trying to, well, I don't think anybody was ever trying to screw anybody, but they had unique ways of signing artists.
Creative accounting as well.
Well, they have something called a full rate deal versus a 3/4 rate deal. This is one example of a record company shenanigan.
Talk about that.
Okay, so at some point in the 70s, the record companies thought, you know what? Why don't we do this? Because we're not doing as well as we want to be doing. So every time the artist makes $1, let's just give them 75 cents. So basically, they started making artists sign record deals that was a 3/4 rate, meaning if you make $1, we're going to give you 75 cents. And it worked for years, except when it became, if there was a bidding war where all the labels wanted to sign an artist, then suddenly they would say, well, how about this? We'll give you a full rate deal where when you make $1, which is the way it probably should have been in the first place.
Yeah, if you're signing to make $1, you should get paid $1.
Exactly. But there are some labels that can't, to this day, do a full rate deal because clever bands, I think Led Zeppelin was one of them, the manager said, okay, fine, we'll sign a 3/4 rate, but we'll have a favored nations deal where if you ever sign another artist for a full rate deal, then you're going to have to go back and pay us that extra quarter for, the rest of time.
Well, their manager was a Peter Grant.
Yeah, he was
very
great.
savvy guy.
Yeah, smart.
And a very big band on top of that.
Yeah.
Now, where did we leave off? Are you in Los Angeles yet?
Oh, okay. So I moved well, actually, I was in Europe getting licensing deals. I signed a band called Soul Asylum. I signed some young artists that were making their own albums at the time. And I would take those records over to Europe. I'd go to France and Germany and London, the UK, and I would license the records, meaning they had a release here on Twin Tone Records, for instance, with Soul Asylum in Minneapolis, and I would go and get those records released overseas, and then we'd start seeing money coming in from overseas. So it's a worldwide business, you know, whether you're selling records in the US or not. Maybe you're big in Russia. I have an artist recently who was huge in Russia but can't get arrested here. California artist.
And it's to an artist's advantage, theoretically, to sign with a Columbia or a Sony or a Universal, because their distribution reaches further. In other words, you can make your own record in your bedroom and then sell it when you want, but if you're in Massachusetts, nobody in California is going to know about it.
Well, that was the old days, yes.
Yes. Well, it's less that way now, but still, I would rather have Sony selling my CD if I made one than trying to sell it myself. Or would that be a stupid decision these days?
Well,
because it has changed.
It's completely changed, because once you put a song up online, it's worldwide. Right? I mean,
It is, yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, then how do you make money doing it? Is it harder to make money for an artist today than it was, say, in the 70s, the 80s, 90s?
I think it is. It's harder for you know, I'm managing a band right now. So I'm managing a UK band called The Big Pink, and we're trying to figure out whether we want to go with a major label. We just got some interest from Virgin Records, and the question is why? And I think, number one, they have money to get into a better studio, to hire better producers, for instance. Now everybody can make a record if they want in their living room, and they can put it out instantly, and they can see whether, you know, there's a lot more niche.
Who's going to hear it?
A
That's
niche
my
market,
question.
that's the problem. Yeah, their family, you know, and the local, whoever you can get locally to listen to your music. So it's more a lot of niche markets now. Whereas in the old days, you know, I hate to go back to the old days, but they were really fantastic. I mean, my job was the most amazing job on earth. My job was to, if somebody told me about a band in Cincinnati, I couldn't go online and check them out live.
You'd go to Cincinnati.
I'd get a tape, I'd say, this is really good. I'd get on a plane and I'd go to Cincinnati. I'd meet the band, we'd go out to dinner, I'd see them perform, I'd go back to Los Angeles, say, yeah, this is something I think we should get involved in, or no, this isn't something that we should get involved in. If I saw a band in Australia, I mean, Jet, for instance, that was still, well, I don't know if you know the band Jet, but Jet's an Australian band that basically said...
Fast and Loud.
Excuse me?
Fast and Loud.
Fast and Loud. And so, you know, you had to jump on a plane and see Jet and meet them and get, you know, and compete with the other labels to be as charming as possible. The Killers, I chased around the world to try and sign them. So, you know, basically it's a matter of who can convince them to sign to the label better. That's what an A&R person's job is.
Now, an A&R person, I don't mean necessarily you, but A&R people in general. What if you don't like what you're hearing, but you know it's going to sell a lot?
Oh.
Then what do you do? Not you personally, but then what does the A&R person do? And that'll vary, I'm sure, from person to person.
It varies from person to person. There's a band that right before I moved to to Nantucket, I was at Universal Music Publishing Group, and there was a band that was very flamboyant, and I thought novelty. I'm not a big fan of novelty music. And everybody was saying, oh, this guy's a great songwriter for other people. You need to get involved. And every time I saw his band, I was really turned off by it. And I didn't sign him. And now he's one of the biggest songwriters. He's been writing with Lady Gaga. I mean, he's huge. So if I had signed this guy, I didn't like his music, but he was getting cuts with other artists. He was collaborating outside of his own project. But he was asking me to sign him for his project. So that is what he was asking. I should have thought, now this is sometimes goes wrong for artists, where the record label says, oh, I see another reason why I want to sign you. Meaning, I'm not going to promote your project, which is what somebody did. Somebody saw past not liking him and as a lead singer with his project. and said, I'm going to sign him, I'm going to shelve his record, and I'm going to get him writing with Lady Gaga and all these other people. So that's probably what happened.
Well, to go back to what you were talking about earlier, it sounds as though you, more than most A&R people, really liked the, I hate to call it product, but the content. You liked the music. You liked the words. You were less likely to say, I don't care what this sounds like, just sign the guy because he's going to make $1 million.
Yes, and I'm probably not as successful as I could have been if I was the other way. Like, I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed spending time with the artist. Many of my peers couldn't even imagine, once the artist was signed, why you would go hang out with them in the studio, you know, if you didn't have to. A lot of, it's a business.
It is, and most people don't know that. The music business.
It's a big business.
It is a very big business, or not as big as it was a few years ago.
Yeah.
But if it weren't a business, it wouldn't exist.
That's right.
That's another thing people don't realize. If you don't have, you know, everybody from you to the accountant, everybody else doing
Right.
his or her job, there's not going to be a company, and nobody's going to hear your music, and you'll never make any money doing it.
But when I started out, it was a little bit more freewheeling. It was, you know, you heard something, you liked it, you jumped on a plane, and you came back. You know, I was only 24, 25, 26, 27. I was really young, and I was doing $1 million deals on a whim, really. You know, I'd say, I think they're great, let's do it. And then we'd do it, you know. Then as I got older, and I think the numbers got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was more, let's look at the statistics, you know, how many radio stations are playing this unknown indie band from Cincinnati? You know, are there people lining the streets to try and see them live? How much money have they made on their own? Which, you know, when I started, asking an artist, well, what have you done on your own, was not even a concept, because artists were still being managed by, you know, they were putting their careers in other people's hands. And then you could see it kind of morphing into, okay, so what have you done for yourself? And I do think that an artist has to sell maybe 20 or 30,000 records before it makes sense to be on a major label, because the major label really doesn't want to take you from the very beginning and carry you over the finish line. They want to kind of complement what you're already doing.
Which has been true for a long, long time. I mean, Elvis Presley, for example, to go way back, he started with Sun Records, which nobody knew of outside of the South, basically.
That's right.
And RCA came along and said, well, we'll buy your contract. And all of a sudden, he's not just a hit in Mississippi and Tennessee, he's a worldwide hit.
Right, so the question would have been, could he have done that without Sun Records?
No.
Sun Records actually laid the groundwork for that to happen.
Absolutely, and everybody, Sam Phillips, the owner, knew it. Presley, I'm sure, knew it too. But in that sense, that's one thing that hasn't changed.
Right.
Is touring still as important as it used to be, or is it even more important
It's actually
now?
the most important. It's where the money is right now. So, and you know, you really, if you think about the internet, it's like handing, if you go to Spotify and say there's really good music there, although they have playlists, but the internet with music, it's really like handing someone a phone book and saying, there's good stuff in there, go find it, you know. So a lot of independent artists aren't going to make it because it's just too crowded. But when it comes to touring, first of all, you start in your local neighborhood, and you play the same club every 3 weeks so that there's continuity and people know, oh, I can go and see that band, you know, often, and now I know their songs, and now I'm bringing my friends, and now the crowd is getting bigger, and now the local radio station is starting to play my music, and now I'm going to go into the local radio station and play live, and then you move to the next town outside, you know, and then you move to the next town, and you just keep kind of planting seeds and kind of growing it. And I think really you should do that work before you become an opening act for a larger act. Because, you know, then if you don't do the work of kind of growing out from your base, then when you're opening up for the larger act, it's hit or miss if anyone's going to come and see you. But if you've done that groundwork, now you're in front of people you never would have been in front of, because you're playing in front of Bon Jovi or the Killers, and you're grabbing their audience.
Which is another way of saying there are no overnight successes.
Very rare.
You have to do an awful lot of work before you get to be a quote overnight success.
And if you
unquote.
are an overnight success because you had one great song and there's nothing behind there to back it up, that's your career right there.
And you see that happen a lot with, the first album's pretty good and the second album.
Well,
is
that's
dead
a
in the
whole
water.
different can of worms. What I see happening a lot with the one-hit wonders is really these TV shows, like American Idol, and they have the TV show, which is their promotion and marketing right there, and the record companies just jam a record out as fast as possible, and then they're on to the next TV show. So you're either making all your money right there, or you're a growth artist and you've got someone handling you who's helping you to kind of hone your craft and become an original. Because really what you want is you want to be an original. You want a voice that can only be your own voice. Like, I would much prefer to sign a Bob Dylan than I would any number of winners of American Idol. Because when Bob Dylan comes on the radio, you go, oh, that's Bob Dylan.
Yes,
You know his voice.
Yes, you do.
That's what I look for as an A&R person for an artist. A voice you can recognize.
Most people who buy records or CDs would probably be surprised to hear that most artists who have CDs out do not make money. For every one that does make it,
Yeah.
how many don't?
I think that, I don't remember the number, but I think it's less than 1% of the artists that are signed by major artists actually succeed to major labels. So, for every Mariah Carey, there's about 50 other artists that were signed that year that didn't happen.
And who we'll probably never hear of anytime.
Sometimes,
Probably.
yeah, many of them, I had an idea recently, because each one of those artists had one great song at least in order to get through the door. Where if someone thought it was a hit song and somehow they ended up, I think every record deal, you're spending $1 million. So someone spent $1 million because you had one great song. And I would love to go back and find all those great songs and put them together and start working them for film and television or
That'd
something.
be interesting.
Yeah, because maybe that guy's gone off, and I know of a fact where one guy became a plumber. They had their shot. They went back. They had children. They had to have a more solid life. So they're working a day job, and they still have those songs kind of sitting there doing nothing. It would be nice to grab them all, and start a publishing company and start licensing them or getting other people to sing the songs.
Yeah, there's a lot more of that out there than most people think.
Yeah.
Great stuff that nobody's ever going to hear unless
Right.
you went through with that idea.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to talk about the contrast between living in LA for a long time, coming back to Nantucket, and now going back to LA. It's hard to imagine two more different places.
Yeah, the whole time that I was away from Nantucket, I was planning on what I was going to wear when I came back, how my table would be set. I always thought, I'm doing this, I'm out in the music industry, I'm having an exciting life, but it was the goal in my mind was always to come back to Nantucket and to maybe even get into the inn business like my family, because I grew up in the hotel business here. And it's been great to be back, but none of what I was imagining was actually the case.
Well, briefly tell us what you did when you came back, this time.
Well, I came back specifically to be the executive director of the Nantucket Community Music Center. And that was a really wonderful experience. It was my first step into working with nonprofits. One of the founders of the Music Center was someone that I got to know. Her name is Eva Marie Taussig, and she has another organization called the Nantucket Musical Arts Society.
Yes.
I dove right into classical music, which when I go back to LA, people are going to be like, you did what? Because I'm all about alternative rock and discovering Nirvana. I didn't discover Nirvana, I wish I did. But so for me to come back to Nantucket and take a position that really was focusing on classical music was new. In fact, the first concert I went to at the Athenaeum the artist was performing, and there was a little bit of a silence, and I put my hand up to start clapping. I might have even gone woo-hoo-hoo if I hadn't seen Mrs. Tausig. I turned and she was going.
You do learn that sort of thing fast, don't you?
Yes, and now I'm a fan of classical music. You know, I've really come to love classical music, and the artists that we bring here through the Nantucket Musical Arts Society have been amazing.
Although I have heard once heard a musician say, clap anytime you want to. Musicians always love to get applause.
I would think so.
But you are supposed to wait. You don't clap when the first movement is over. You clap
right
when the whole piece is done. Anyway.
Well, so the difference between living in, I'm looking forward to, when I get back, a little bit more organic food. There's not a lot of organic food on Nantucket readily available.
It's funny to think in that way. More organic food in Los Angeles, which some people would say is the most plastic place in the universe.
But it isn't. I mean, it's a very healthy place. So I'm looking forward to the lifestyle in LA, I think.
How's the smog these days?
There is no smog. You know,
really?
We have very little smog because of all of the regulations that we've had on emissions, which, by the way, have now been loosened. So maybe we're going to come back to smog because this new administration is taking those regulations away, which just seems a little crazy since we cleared it up. I'm hoping to get back into the music industry. I feel like in the years that I was away here on Nantucket, it was a good time to kind of step away because the industry was trying to figure out how to reinvent itself. What I'm reading is that Sony had their monetarily most successful year ever this year.
Well, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's...
And I actually don't know how. So I'm going to be coming back to LA saying, okay, how are you making it? It's streaming, I guess, but the artists are saying they're not making money. But the record companies are making money, which is it's all the same again.
Yes, that hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
I hope we see you back here again, but if Los Angeles is as nice as you say it is, we'll get it if you don't come back.
I think we might come back in about 4 months, I swear. I'm already sad that I'm leaving. It's just making me very sad. I'm going to miss the radio station a lot as well.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
No, you know. Next time.
Yes,
I could talk to you for
okay.
hours. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming in, Nanci. I appreciate it. For Profiles, I'm Charley Walters. My guest has been Nanci Walker. Please tune in to Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. Thanks for tuning in.